Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to start the session Unlocking the Potential of Carbon Markets for Emission Reduction and Removals in Supporting the Transition to Net Zero. So this is a session that will discuss a topic that has gained more and more importance over the past couple of years. International carbon markets and also domestic carbon markets are gaining ground around the world, and the MENA region is no exception. So in this session, we will discuss key aspects of how the carbon markets can be set up in a way that they generate emission credits that are real, additional, and long-term, as enshrined in the Article 6 regulation under the Paris Agreement. And of course, also we've seen in the past couple of years a lot of movement in the so-called voluntary carbon markets, because it took quite some time for the international negotiations to agree on the rules of the Article 6 of the international compliance markets, and the process is still going on. And therefore, it is really high time in the run-up to COP28 in Dubai to see what are open issues, how can the region actually contribute to the success of international carbon markets, and how can we overcome problems that have been created by actors that don't follow the principles of environmental integrity. Some of you may heard of the discussions in international media and also by civil society organizations on whether voluntary carbon markets actually achieve real, additional, and long-term emission reductions and removals. And of course, we need to prevent that this spills over into the Article 6, into the compliance markets. So I'm very happy to have with me here on this panel Uma Maheswaran from the Regional Collaboration Center Dubai, who will give us an introduction into the topic and into what the Regional Collaboration Center can actually do to support the region. And then we have a very high-level panel here, Maria Al-Jishi from the Designated National Authority of Saudi Arabia on Carbon Market Mechanisms, and also a member of the Article 6.4 Supervisory Body. And the Article 6.4 Supervisory Body is currently very active in laying the ground for a successful implementation of the Article 6.4 mechanism under the Paris Agreement. Then we have Ayman Refai from Egypt, who's head of the Carbon Credits Department in the Ministry of Environment. Of course, you all know Egypt was the host of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. So Egypt is having a lot of work on carbon markets, both voluntary and compliance. Egypt was a leading country in Africa in the context of the Clean Development Mechanism, and now has interesting legislation placed to further the voluntary market in the country. And then we have Ousmane Falsar from Senegal. He is the coordinator of the West African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. This is a really pioneering effort to generate capacity for Article 6 and international climate finance in the West African region. It has now been operational for a number of years, and we are really interested to hear what could be the lessons for the MENA region. And then we'll have two speakers who join us virtually. We have Ashok Sakar from the World Bank, who is the specialist and program leader for infrastructure and MENA, and of course, therefore, has the background to give some input on how World Bank and its carbon market programs could actually generate benefits for the region. And last but not least, we have Paul Sakour. He is a specialist on carbon dioxide removal, has been working on this topic for many years, and has also written important contributions on how removal credits could be brought into international carbon markets. Of course, I should also introduce myself. I'm Axel Michaelova. I'm senior founding partner at Perspectives. Perspectives is a consultancy and think tank that has this year celebrated its 20th anniversary of working in international carbon markets and climate finance and national climate policies. And I'm also a researcher at the University of Zurich. So without any further ado, I would invite Uma to give his introductory presentation. Uma, you have the floor.
Thank you, Axel. Am I audible?
Okay.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Uma Maheshwaran from RCC, Middle East, North Africa, and the South Asia region. Primarily working on the Article 6 and the carbon pricing implementation in the region from Morocco to Bangladesh. So that's the vast area which I have. Around 30 countries we have to get ourselves mobilizing the resources for Article 6 implementation, and domestic carbon pricing activities also implemented in these countries. So RCC is a kind of extended arm of UNFCCC working on three broad areas. One is primarily on the trying to work on the ambition which has been set by the Secretariat in terms of providing guidelines to the various countries how they can develop mitigation outcomes and mitigation projects. Then also kind of facilitating the implementation on the climate change activities and kind of providing partnership with the like-minded countries, cross countries, with cross borders, so that we can have the broad level of working on regional collaborations, policy support, technical capacities, partnership building, communication, data collection, and logistics. So when we say that we are working on these 30 countries, we work on three broad areas: Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. And our main agenda here is that we have to support the countries for implementing the NDCs, operationalizing Article 6, and facilitating the need-based finance of climate finance activities in all these regions. We have, as I mentioned, we cover around 5 important areas: mitigation, adaptation, SD goals, then transparency, and the means of implementation. That's the overall view about us in terms of how we deliver our thematic work programs. What we are doing specifically on the Article 6 is that we follow the guidelines set by the CMA. CMA is kind of with the Secretariat and with the regional collaboration centers have kind of given a clear work program on how we have to work on the capacity building initiatives across various aspects of the Article 6, not only in the MENA and South Asia region, globally. Article 6 regional collaboration centers are we are located from Bangkok, Dubai, Lomé, Kampala, Granada, and Panama, wherein we cover the overall global south with all the countries, so wherein we implement various activities which I have mentioned in my previous slide. So the agenda which we work on is that we have a top-down approach. We first work on the regional level, and we work on the country level, and then we kind of prioritize what would be the strategies which ensure the actions which can be taken for linking with the NDC targets. In terms of the country readiness, we work on the gap assessments, we work on the prioritizing the needs. For example, our approach varies from country to country. Like if we have an approach specifically to Morocco, it would be different from Algeria, or different from Egypt, or from Bhutan. In terms, if I have to speak, we have a colleague from Egypt. So Egypt is kind of establishing their domestic carbon pricing through the ETS. We help them in the technicalities of that. However, in case of Algeria, where the situation is completely different, it's kind of, they start from scratch, so our approach would be completely different over there. Likewise, in case of Bhutan, in the South Asia region, they are kind of a bit advanced in the ladder in terms of implemented with the multiple Article 6 activities, so our approach varies from country to country. In terms of the capacity building, our main approach is to get the institutional setup ready for the countries. We help the countries in case if they could not establish the Article 6.4 DNA, and we also help them in the regulatory guidelines, how they can go for it. The most important thing, which is the hot topic, is the CDM transition. So we have around 49 projects in MENA region which could potentially transfer from CDM to Article 6.4. However, the response in terms of getting the registration, the transition process is not that high. We help if there is any request from the private sector on how they have to get the transition activities done. In addition to that, we also help the countries if they would like to prioritize their sectors in terms of what would be the pilot projects which they can try to develop in their area. The recent thing which we also started is helping the private sector on Article 6 operationalization, meaning to say uh, there would be a good amount of interventions needed from the private sector. So we also help the private sector in this aspect as well. So what we have done, what we have done in the recent like 6 to 7 months is that we have done on the regional level, we have conducted 2 regional workshops wherein we had the opportunity to work with the train around 30 countries in Africa in the regional climate week which happened in Nairobi last month. We kind of replicated the same thing here as well in MENA, and I had the opportunity to have Ayman and some of the other colleagues from the room for the 4-day training program which we had, wherein we covered all the broad aspects of carbon pricing, which is related to the domestic carbon market, 6.2, 6.4, and the CDM transitions. So it's a kind of a 4-day intensive work program. Many of the clients would be feeling bored that every day I was starting and today also I'm here. So that's something which we do on a regional level. In terms of the, we do multiple series of webinars specific to Article 6 for covering this. The new one which we are trying to have is how to bring in the subnational level entities also into Article 6. So there will be a series of webinars which will be organized in the coming months. And we have country-level engagements under discussion with Morocco. We have country-level discussions with Egypt, Algeria in terms of setting up their Article 6.4 DNAs. We recently completed a private sector engagement workshop in Abu Dhabi. We had a very good participation from Abu Dhabi, and this around more than 100 plus private entities participated in this, trying to understand how they can participate in various Article 6 instruments which are there. Then last but not the least, the CDM transition, which we have. We are hand-holding a couple of POAs which are there in the Nepal. As a next step, what we are going to do is that we will be coming up with regional focus workshops, Middle East, North Africa, South Asia. 1 minute. And then we are also, the post-COP, we will be coming up with technical products, handbooks for helping the countries to pursue Article 6 in a better way. With this, I'm done.
Thank you very much, Uma, for giving the overview of what the Regional Collaboration Center can do. And given that regional collaboration centers now have a long history of providing capacity building, I would invite all the relevant stakeholders in the region to actually engage with RCC and ensure that also the synergies of the various capacity building activities are maximized. With that, I would now like to go to our panel. I would start with Maria. Maria, of course, you have been playing a key role not only in the debate about the regulation of the Article 6.4 mechanism, but also we've heard the announcement by the Minister of Energy, His Highness, on the GCOM, the domestic carbon crediting scheme in Saudi Arabia. So my question to you would be, how do you see the links between the international process and the national development of carbon market? How can we harness the markets in the best way, and what would have to be achieved on the international level in the context of the Article 6.4 rulemaking to actually enable these regional and national level carbon markets in the best possible way for your region?
Thank you very much, Axel, for your question. I think I'm going to take the questions a little bit backwards. I think in order for Article 6 to actually be implementable, not just in the MENA region, but anywhere, it needs clarity and simplicity. And that's a very tall order from something like Article 6. It's usually entrenched in complexity and very, very long, arduous legal texts. And I think that's a challenge both for the capacity building programs, the UNFCCC, and also the supervisory body, is how do we make the implementation of this article something simple, not in its integrity or credibility, but simple in the way that it is understood and simple in the way that it is operationalized. And because I wear many hats, as you so kindly introduced, I'm very much aware that in order for people to be able to engage, a lot needs to happen on the ground to prepare for that. And GCOM that was announced by His Royal Highness that became operational on Monday is really a way for Saudi Arabia to both increase awareness domestically about carbon markets and how they can influence and positively impact our efforts to achieve emission reductions and removals, but also it's a way to build up capacity and get comfort among our sectors in the way that these carbon credits or certificates are used. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Maria. I would like to pass on to Ayman. Ayman, of course, as I mentioned, Egypt was a front runner in the clean development mechanism. It had some of the largest projects on the African continent. I remember the chemical industry, nitric acid, you generated millions of credits, and I think it was a great success. Now I understand that there is the legal basis for voluntary carbon market operations through the Egyptian Stock Exchange. So could you share how you use the experience from the CDM in now designing Egypt's participation in the carbon markets of the future?
Actually, thank you very much for this so critical question. Frankly speaking, frankly speaking, we spend a lot of time to understand CDM mechanism for the first time. So we couldn't reach on the ground just about 12 projects. That's what I enjoyed. Some of them are huge, as you mentioned. We produced millions of CRs at that time. But for the marketing reason and the collapse of the prices of CDM at that time, in the transition period in between CDM and what after CDM was in Glasgow, we stopped for a while because it's not that encouraged prices even for the private sector or any other projects. Now we are back. 6.4 is raising in the sky, as they say, and we are trying to prepare ourselves now in cooperation with RCC. We have a roadmap, but actually we haven't been that optimistic because we have some challenges with now. Within the COP27, we launched the platform of carbon market, but we're still working on the legislations and the regulations. You are starting something from scratch. It takes time, but we are working in parallel among the carbon market, infrastructure, the capacity building for the staff, the capacity building, or the awareness for the private sector and the beneficiary of this market. Supplying and demanding are the equation of this market. So we are working on the whole stakeholders at that time. Some challenges come through some people afraid of the prices of the market. The feasibility studies is a master of the scene for the carbon market. So we have to be careful about the sensitivity of the people, even especially the private sector. Private sector deal as a win-win situation. And the capital escape from any threats. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ayman. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, the demise of the CDM market threw a big spanner into the wheels, and regenerating trust among the private sector that now the carbon market will be more sustainable in the sense of the word is, I think, really crucial, because we can't afford a second crash in the carbon market, because then the trust would be lost fully. I would now like to pass on to Usman. Usman, of course, the both of us have been working over the past couple of years to work in the West African Alliance on Carbon Markets Climate Finance, which was the first regional alliance to actually ensure that capacity building is not just a one-way flow, but that we have really spreading of capacity on the regional level according to the needs, and that also the front runners in a region can inform those who are coming a bit later. So, Usman, how would you see the lessons of the work of the West African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance for the MENA region? What is the learning that the work of the West African countries together has achieved? And of course, these countries are now very visible in the world of international carbon markets, which is a big difference compared to the CDM. Usman, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Axel, and I really thank the Secretariat for inviting me in this panel, in this MENA region. In MENA region, we have many countries that are our neighbors, I mean Morocco and Algeria. By the way, Mauritania is part of the West African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. So we initiated this alliance in 2016 in the margin of COP22 in order to facilitate active participation, as you mentioned, of our region in carbon market and not miss the trend as we did with the CDM. We are assisting our member countries to mobilize additional resources with carbon markets and climate finance in order to facilitate the implementation of their respective NDCs and also create enabling environment for technology transfer in our region. We have been organizing several activities, several workshops in order to raise awareness among different stakeholders. So we started by doing mapping of key stakeholders, starting from policymakers, the private sector, the non-state actors, NGOs, and local communities. And we, at a national level, help our member countries to raise awareness among those actors in order to let them know about the opportunities, challenges ahead of us when it comes to operationalize Article 6. We've been engaging also several capacity building activities in terms of elaboration of a readiness for Article 6 blueprint, thanks to the support of our technical partners like Perspective and other technical partners in our region. We managed to develop a blueprint that have been provided to our member countries so that they can know how to engage on Article 6 and operationalize it at a country level. We prepared some tools, some template of document, for example, how to write a letter of authorization, all these issues that are needed at a host country level to be fully operational when it comes to take advantage of carbon markets. We also initiated in many of our countries the creation of national Article 6 platforms where we can have all the key stakeholders that can engage on a regular basis and are informed on how we should engage to develop carbon market in the country. We have this first level intervention at host country level, but we are also trying to create an enabling environment for integrated regional carbon market in West Africa. And we convene our policymakers on roundtables, and we facilitate the exchange between countries, so peer-to-peer learning process, and in some cases to avoid to reinvent the wheel, because in the country we have some front runners like Ghana, like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and some other countries who are really starting, I cannot say from scratch, but difficult with some challenging situation. So in order to fast track everything, we facilitate this kind of peer-to-peer learning and exchange of experience that can help these countries to move faster in the way of preparation. And last but not least, recently we managed to launch the initiative we call the West African Carbon Market Hub. because we want to position our region as one of the main hubs in terms of carbon market in West Africa. And 2 weeks ago, we had the first event in Abidjan, where we managed to have more than 150 people coming from local private sector, international private sector, investors, policymakers like ministers, local communities, all these actors in one place, and we get into details on how we should engage on carbon market so that at the end of the day, everybody should be informed, and we will promote and work to have the political buy-in in our respective countries so that carbon market can be developed in the region. And we are working on harmonizing our policies so that by 2020, 2030, we hope that we could have a regional integrated market in West Africa. So far, we managed to have few results in terms of bilateral agreement signing. For example, in Senegal, in Ghana, we have some bilateral agreement with Switzerland, with Japan, with Singapore, so that ITMO transaction is now something that we can expect out of this bilateral agreement. So far, this is where we are. We are a facilitative body, helping countries to take advantage and giving them capacity, letting them aware of the challenge and the opportunity, and giving them technical advice so that at the end of the day, we will not miss the train again as we did with CDM. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Usman. And we already see how this actually has been working on the ground, because currently, I remember when I participated in the CDM negotiations in the 2000s, Africans' voices were not visible. Now the African group is always leading the interventions in the international negotiations, so it's a big change. With that, I would like to pass on to our remote participant, Ashok, from the World Bank, and Chetway in the context of capacity building. The World Bank, of course, has played a huge role in capacity building for international carbon markets with the funds that set up the CDM. I remember the Prototype Carbon Fund. I now see the Carbon Action Data Trust in Singapore, which of course tries to provide data on the carbon markets around the world and wants to help to link the registries. So Ashok, what would be your lessons for the MENA region given the experience of the bank in the context of carbon markets and of course your specialist experience in the MENA region? Ashok, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Axel. First of all, let me ask you, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you and see you nicely.
Excellent. Excellent. And thank you for the opportunity to the UNFCCC and yourself and all very many familiar faces I see after a long time. I think, you know, my views obviously are coming a little bit more from an implementer and financier perspective, because the bank, of course, has been very actively working in decarbonization along different sectors. And I think the challenges, of course, remain the same. What we had during the CDM days in early 2000s and today's post-Article 6 implementation regime remains the same. I think the benefits also remain the same, but what has changed is the reality that many more technologies have become much more commercially viable. And unfortunately, there is this uneven distribution amongst particularly Africa, which used to be the CDM time as well, but it continues, as you rightly said, that not much of this benefit is being passed on to the real developing world, particularly in Africa and other parts of the world. So I think what the lessons we have learned during the CDM, and I used to be the CDM Met panel member for 2 years, between 2004 and 2006, and we could see this demise coming because it was overly complicated. It was, as one of the speakers said in the beginning, we have to simplify matters to actually make it more amenable for the private sector investment to come in. Without private sector investments, you will not have net zero. Public sector investments alone, along with all the development finance, which the likes of the World Bank and other banks are putting in, are not even 1/4 of what we need in terms of trillions of dollars which needs to flow in. And private sector doesn't have the patience to go through this complicated process. So I think while we talk about maintaining the robustness of the system and avoiding double counting, etc., I think it has to be made more simple. And I think that the capacity building plays a huge role. And I would also think that capacity building, what we have found in our scheme of things, is sharing of knowledge and models within countries, not necessarily doing a top-down capacity building where you go in and put the guidance in front of countries which are not yet ready, perhaps, but yet bring countries which have gone through this process and have them share their experience and the approach as to how they were able to scale up the activities in the carbon market in spite of all the challenges they have faced in the last 20 years. And there are many examples, of course, many examples in MENA. I know the Saudis, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has gone into this big time through the even the announcement which was made earlier this week, the GHG crediting and offsetting scheme, the GCOM, and then of course the voluntary carbon market deals of almost, I think, 3 to 4 million tons of carbon credits, which have been made by the other voluntary carbon market company, the regional Saudi Arabia voluntary market company. Now, I know UAE has done a lot, and they are getting into a new national system of carbon credits as well. Now, at the same time, as we heard and we know, there are countries like Algeria and Tunisia and of course, Morocco, who want to do yet more. They have lots of opportunities of doing clean energy transition, renewable energy, energy efficiency, cooling, whatnot. I mean, and of course, lots of afforestation is also possible. Now, I think this article had a very complex protocol in place, which again, the uptake would be the same as we saw in the previous decades. And I think we want to avoid that. So my interest as an implementer and a financier, particularly to unlock private sector finance, which is absolutely critical for net zero objectives, is to make it a simpler, yet allow for adequate carbon revenues to flow in, adequate technology transfer to take place, because ultimately we want that technology transfer, and of course socioeconomic gains, not necessarily focus on only the carbon credits, but see what are the co-benefits of what we are doing. Now, there are certain mitigation mechanisms which have multiple co-benefits. And we need to look at that as well. How do you quantify? How do you value the quality of carbon credits in this new scheme in order to make sure that you are really giving the right credit and actually making the world go towards net zero in the end? I think technologies are available. I don't think we should worry about the technology. It's a matter of bringing the right technology, the right place, with the right kind of financing incentive. And I believe that voluntary carbon markets have a huge role to play. But yet, we have to also unlock the private capital in the right manner with the right policies and incentives. I think I'm going to stop there, but really appreciate opening this topic and happy to, of course, continue the rest of the discussion. Thank you, Axel.
Can you reopen mic? Oh, thank you, Ashok. And of course, comment simplification. Definitely, this is crucial to make the market work. But of course, it could also mean, that if simplified in the wrong way, the trust in the market is lost. So we need to ensure that the simplification actually comes with a high degree of conservativeness and credibility. And I see that the Article 6.4 supervisory body is struggling a bit with this, for example, in the context of baseline contraction factors. So I would now like to pass on to Paul. Ashok has already mentioned removals. You are the removal specialist. The region, of course, MENA has been doing a lot of work on removals in the past, and especially carbon capture and storage. So my question to you would be, What would be your recommendation to the MENA region in the context of generating removals for the carbon markets, noting that the voluntary carbon market currently has niches with extremely high prices but low volumes for specific types of removal technologies? Paul, you have the floor.
Yeah, many thanks, Axel. And sorry I couldn't be there today. I had to return back home yesterday, so it was a pleasure to be in Riyadh for the earlier part of the conference. Yeah, I did want to make a couple of points just on behalf of just to mention IETA's work in this area and the business partnership market implementation and the activities that have been going on under that umbrella, particularly working with our partners in West Africa and at the World Bank to develop the implementation system. I also wanted to sort of echo the points a little bit of Maria and Ashok in looking at simplicity, and I think work that I've been involved with earlier in the year with CAPSARC to look at some of the supply curves of carbon credits within Saudi Arabia, for example, has tried to look at where we can find a nationally appropriate, nationally relevant approach to baseline setting and that can generate credits that could be used under GCOM without necessarily having to look at the international standards. When we look at international standards, for example, we see some crediting platforms not willing to provide crediting to renewable energy systems, which may be very, very relevant to the Middle East, North African context still, and which we're looking for carbon finance. So I thought I'd quickly make those points. On the specifics of reductions and removals, I think, you know, this is a topic that's been around for a long time, but we haven't seen a lot of carbon finance, well, pretty much zero carbon finance flowing to these projects outside of maybe the US, where there has been some carbon finance involved. And I think part of the challenge is methodological. So how do we get that assurances over permanence and the appropriate liability arrangements in the event of carbon reversal? So who would be responsible for replacing any credits where should the site leak in the future? And so this has always been a challenging subject. We spent 7 or 8 years discussing this under the context of the ICAO protocol and the CDM, and we did land on consensus among parties, but then we had all the problems that CDM encountered very shortly thereafter, so we didn't see any projects coming forward. And I think what our goal is now, and I speak on behalf of broad membership of IETA in particular, is to make sure we don't throw out those lessons, but actually make sure we learn off them and implement them and build them into the new frameworks that are coming under Article 6, whether that's through 6.2 by coming up with robust standards within the VCM. And I think there's a lot of work going on in that space now through I know you're involved in some of it, Axel, through CCS Plus, but also through the Global Carbon Council, through American Carbon Registry, where we have 3 or 4 new standards all emerging around CCS. So I'm looking forward to being part of that conversation, but I'll hand it back to you, Axel, in view of the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this broad intervention. May I just focus again on what would be your recommendation for the MENA region to harness the current tendency in the voluntary carbon market to pay very high prices for certain removal technologies under, for example, Pure Earth, but also other standards? Would you see this as a relevant opportunity for the MENA region, or would you think that there are some issues that would make you a bit cautious to go down that route?
Well, yeah, without getting too much into the detail, I think one of the challenges that I'm aware of in the current approaches in the VCM is to pretty much rely on national permitting and national regulations to control the selection, operation and closure and long-term liability of storage sites. Now, these regulatory frameworks are in place in North America and in Europe, various other sprinklings of countries, but they're not widespread. So one of the significant barriers we're going to see for implementing the current suite of VCM standards is that lack of, or the absence of, those regulatory frameworks. On the other hand, the work that I've been involved with Global Carbon Council has tried to find a way of bridging that gap by integrating a more technical standard that can support a national permitting regime and manage those issues and build that in partly, at least, into the methodological framework itself, to allow for countries that haven't got those mature regulatory systems in place to be able to have some assurance and some comfort that the appropriate due diligence has been done by operators to support these projects deployment. So this is something that should be coming out within a month's time or so, and that should hopefully be able to advance that conversation once the Global Carbon Council is ready to publish that. So I would put a pitch in there for the GCC work on this topic as one important gap-filling activity.
Yeah, thanks.
Does that help answer your question, Axel?
Yes, thanks a lot, Paul. Yeah, I would really like to see how now the different methodologies play together. I also wanted to raise, there is the so-called CCS Plus initiative, where the Perspectives and South Pole jointly provide input in developing modules for methodologies to capture the whole life cycle of removals, and hopefully after this getting into Vera also would support the Article 6 discussions on methodology. So this is a really very active field. Now I would like to come back to the panelists in the context of the prices on the international carbon markets. Ayman has already mentioned, that in Egypt, of course, the action deteriorated as the CDM market crashed. We currently see a fall in prices of voluntary carbon credits. That reminds me a lot of the crash of the CDM market, which, as in the context of the CDM,
it's not a very simple question to answer, but I think that we need to recognize that the reason why demand went down for CDM credits in the earlier crash, and what's happening now, at least in my understanding, are these two declines in demand are happening for different reasons. So the decline in demand that happened in the CDM era, it happened because there was a lack of faith in the credits that are coming out of the CDM, and there was a shock and a reaction to that. But what we've seen in the recent uptake and then downtake of credits is that there was momentum around the adoption of the Article 6 rulebook that really breathed new life into voluntary carbon markets, and the momentum carried through for 2 years. But I think now people are becoming aware of what was actually agreed in those texts of Article 6, and they're beginning to ask questions, and the questions are complex, and the answers are not simple, and oftentimes the answers depend on regulations that don't yet exist, and so it is very difficult to have demand for a market where there is deep uncertainty in the regulation that's going to be introduced by countries. And so even I think the private sector investors would naturally hesitate to demand a supply that may tomorrow be unrecognizable under the regulatory framework that gets introduced. It would be a wasted investment, though I hesitate to say that because any investment in reductions or removals is never wasted. But essentially, would they be able to use it for the purpose with which they chose to purchase it? And I think there is a lack of clarity in that aspect, and that clarity is extremely necessary to allow for demand to rise again. But also, what type of demand would come out of this downswing is left up to market players and countries once they're done regulating, or as they regulate, is the demand for credits going to remain a demand for the same kinds of credits that we've seen throughout the years, or is the demand going to shift to a new type of credit, to an ITMO, for an example, or for an MCU under the 6.4 mechanism, or is it going to be shifting more towards CORSIA compliance credits in that world of it? And until there is clarity, at least some clarity to a certain extent, until there is a little bit of convergence between the divergent markets that are happening right now, I think the picture will remain blurry and unclear, and I would hesitate to give an indication of what demand needs to be. But then turning back to the part of your question where you were asking about projects, I don't know. I doubt something like that is going to work. But then is the market going to be creating at least a price floor or a price ceiling for each one of these project types? I think that's also extremely questionable. And so from our perspective, prices are really driven from a supply-demand aspect rather than any kind of
the price. Actually, we have to be wonder if we compare the ETS market with the American market, the California, both of them developed countries, and I think USA, it's not missing the demand. You can find that it's the price range in the States, $15 to $30, and in the ETS, 80 to 102 euro. It's a huge difference, actually, more than double. Let's compare this with what we are producing. I am talking about the compliance market in this stage. But let's compare with the price in the voluntary market. It doesn't exceed $2. So let's talk back to the sustainability principles. If you put investments and the price collapse, okay, you put investments, you gain some fair price for you, IRR is suitable for the project or whatever it is, okay, done. But upon sudden, it collapsed. In this case, do you think the others should follow you as a private sector? Let me get the hat of the private sector, which is our main partner. Back to Glasgow, we have to enhance the role of the private sector and the NGOs in the mitigation action activities and whatever. So this is we go to the international market. Okay, we have to, we go to the international market. Okay, we have to get our needs first. This is kind of security. But let's take a panoramic view. It means if the others did like us, you are shrinking the voluntary market in the near future. So the needs are growing up, but the supply will be less. Sorry for this, but I think we have to reach a fair formula for this, actually, globally.
Thank you very much. I would now like to open to the audience questions that you may have or comments. So floor is open. I hope we have a roving mic around. So I can't see you much, but yes, please come in. Give your name and institution, please, before asking your question or making your comment.
Ahmed Al-Hazmi. I just have two questions. Now, most of the private sector looking to the CDM approach, and I think Ayman and Maria both very important point, the price. Now, I remember it was from $60 now to $15. How we will send a good message to our partner that the new credits market will be add value from environment and from financial point of view. This is number one. Number two, I think when we reviewed the Paris and the 6, actually there is many requirements. I mean, really, many steps has been to taking very, very complex. The question is there any way, means and ways to make it clearly understandable and very easy to be adopted? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me maybe give an introductory response before passing on to the panel. Of course, the price is essentially the outcome of the overall trust in the market. If the market is seen as trustworthy, if the market is seen as having scarcity, then the price will be high, like we saw in the euro scandals, and then we can actually generate a market that can have sufficient demand in the long term. But yeah, I would like to pass any one of you who would like to add.
No.
No?
Thanks.
Maria, you would like to come in? Or Usman? Well,
Yes.
maybe Usman first.
Thank you, Axel. I think you raised some very important point, because what we see now in the market is the demand is asking for high quality of credits. That means that we need to have high integrity in the system, build on trust and all the issues that you mentioned. But from the perspective of the supply side for our countries, for example, I think this requires the mechanism on how prices are set in order to give more predictability and forget about these 10 or 20 euros price per ton. I think we are in a new area where we all need to make efforts. If we make effort in terms of supply, also the demand should follow, and also fix fair price for carbon. That's the only way we can take advantage of these opportunities, from my point of view.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Usman. Just wanted to note that the current difference in price between voluntary credits and Article 6 credits, ITMOs, is quite one order of magnitude. We've seen the Swiss program, which is the biggest program, had an average price last year of more than $20 per ITMO, whereas the voluntary credits currently on the exchanges are trading between 1 and 2. So it's a significant difference. I would invite a second question.
Not accepting, and to bring it to the level if you want to certify a product. I'm not talking about a country level, but a company or a product level. You will be criticized that, can I use carbon credit to reduce the carbon footprint of that product? And to decarbonize, can I use it as a temporary solution? So this is what will help in creating and having more effective utilization of the carbon credit. Thank you.
Anyone who would like to come in on this question or comment? Yes, Iman, please.
Actually, greenwashing, as you mentioned, as a terminology, when it started concerning the fund availability for implementing green projects. But later on, may I explain this? If you don't use the green funds as a green bond or something like this in a green project, in actual green projects, or you just named it as a green project, in this case, they consider it as a greenwash. But on the other hand, now they are talking about another kind of greenwash if we haven't enough good quality certificates, or missing the measures or the quantitative or whatever, they using this the same. But actually, I don't know how comes this while we are using verification and validation and accredited entities or whatever it is. All of these entities under the condition of the UNFCCC, we are following the same. It's a very limited number all over the world, around figure 24 entities who do this. So if I got your question, I think it's more costs, actually, to prove that we are good enough to match or to avoid these negative terminologies like greenwash. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are almost up with our time, so I would ask everyone to give a hand to thank the panelists. And I think we have a bright future for the carbon market in MENA and beyond if we do the right decisions in the next